welcome to Future Readiness with me, Sizakele. My friends call me Zara. If you're new to the platform, welcome because it means we're making the circle bigger. And we know you're going to love what you're going to hear today. So be sure to share and tell 10 other cousins and sisters and brothers. If you're returning to the platform, welcome back. We love having you back. And by now, you know that we invite onto the platform human beings that I've had the fortune of meeting who are often smart, kind, talented, and invested in moving the human family forward. So we continue that tradition. And today's conversation, I'm certain, is going to be blowing minds because when I first met this wonderful gentleman who will introduce himself shortly, I didn't know a million things. And when I left after our dialogue, it felt like I had been through a second opportunity to study for a senior degree. So, Phakamisa, when you and I first met, it was on the lawns of one institution called the Gordon Institute of Business Science, GIBS for short, because I had been given the ultimate pleasure of inviting you on the occasion of publishing your book. So why don't you tell the wonderful people in our community who you are and how you even got to cross paths with me on that campus?
Sure. Zad, thanks a lot to you and team for inviting me on this sunny afternoon in Cape Town. It is sunny in Cape Town. Um, I'm Phakamisa Ndzamela now. I've got a problem with my name. It's such a challenge, right? And I've noticed as I've grown that it's become a challenge. When I was growing up in a small town called Mthatha
Yeah,
in the Transkei,
yeah,
I'm
of
not being
all,
nostalgic. Yeah,
yes.
I'm not being nostalgic when I say Transkei because the place is trans of the Kai. Um, yeah, so when I was growing up in Mthatha, my parents called me Phaki, which is a nickname for Phakamisa. So the name Phakamisa was only used if I was in trouble. So Phaki, if they said Phaki, then I would know all is good. But I had the privilege to do some time as a graduate trainee in England, in London, for a news agency called Thomson Reuters. Now, I introduced myself as Phaki there, and all my colleagues were flabbergasted. They didn't know what to do with themselves. So, Phaki, it's racist, mate. It's unacceptable. It's derogatory for Pakistani. So I had to change to, because Phakamisa became a problem for them.
Yes.
So I had to change to Paga or Pacman, names that I was never given by my parents. I even called myself PK, and someone said to me, there's a big problem with terrorism, mate. If you say it's PK, it could be a Pulemot Kalashnikov, mate. So careful. So I never win with my name. I moved to Cape Town seven years ago or 6 years ago, and I had resorted or reverted to the name Phakamisa. Now, in the colored community, the name Phakamisa has certain connotations, which means uplifting the gang number or something like that. So even in Cape Town, I'm now transforming back to Paki and trying to shed the Phakamisa name. So I use the Phakamisa name for formal engagements like these ones. I was born in Mthatha, 1985 on the 25th of February. I'm told it was a Monday before midday, around 11 a.m. Yeah, grew up, mom, dad, civil servants, my mom an English teacher at a rural school. So I was privileged enough through her to know who Wordsworth was, who Shakespeare was from an early age. My dad worked for Inland Revenue, which became the tax collecting department. South African Revenue Services. I wouldn't say we were poor, but we weren't wealthy. Call it the missing middle. Grew up with two siblings who are in Johannesburg, and I'm exiled in Cape Town.
Exiled in Cape Town, the place I call the Republic,
Yep.
for all sorts of wonderful reasons. But that's wonderful. That's actually such a rich introduction because oftentimes when you are asked, tell us about yourself, people often go to the place that describes their role, right? They rush to the place that says, I am the CEO of this or I'm the CEO of that. So it's always refreshing when somebody says, Ingaba yami ila, as in my belly button. The non-Zulu speakers on this platform will understand. When somebody says Ingaba yami, they mean my roots are from this place. So you've taken us to that place. So, but the Transkei, what is it now called in the new Gen Z history revision? Is it part of the Eastern Cape?
It's part of the Eastern Cape. So Mthatha is part of the Eastern Cape. In the past, in the colonial times, it
Yes.
used to be called, it was part of the Cape Province. So it used to be called Eastern Cape Province, but now it's the Eastern Cape.
Oh, fantastic! But
Yeah.
so now you live, you work. You've now given us a taste that there was a time in your life where you ended up in that place where the sun sets at 3 o'clock in the winter. How then do you get to a place where you become an author of a book that I'm really, really excited about us diving into? Because even just the choice of the topic was mind blowing for me when you first explained it. So how did that happen?
Sure. I think everything happens in context, dogs are. I must say we were fortunate enough when we were growing up in Mthatha, even though we were not well off financially, but our parents made sure we were wealthy in books.
Yes.
So we had a small study. I wouldn't call it a library, it was a study. And our father always bought the Daily Dispatch every day. So he would read it, and when we came back from primary school, we had the opportunity to read the paper and mess it up. But we were told to pack it back again. I get to Wits University, so fast forward, I've matriculated at a Catholic school called Maria Zell. I think Tokyo, no, Musiwa Likota is my alma mater. I think Epanet Mbeki is my alma mater there. Albertina Sisulu too.
Okay.
It used to be a good school, one of those old missionary schools. So I complete matric there in 2002. I enroll for a humanities qualification at Wits University in Braamfontein. My father wanted me to be a lawyer, so I ended up doing BA law, but I didn't like BA law. I was supposed to go to law school for 2 years. Instead of going to law school for 2 years, I did an honors in journalism.
Okay.
Now, before I had done that honors in journalism, I was part of a club in society at Wits called the Mail and Guardian Society, and we essentially sold the paper on behalf of the Mail and Guardian for free, but at half the subscription rate that professionals would pay. So essentially, we would negotiate a subscription rate for students. And every Friday, when we distributed the paper, there would always be discussions at Wits universities about the type of news stories that were put out by the Mail and Guardian and criticism from a comfortable armchair, you'd expect that from students. That had a role in interesting me to go into the writing route. I must mention that my sister
Yes.
had studied journalism at Rhodes University and had become a sub editor at Business Day. She went on to become a deputy editor of The Weekend, which was the weekend publication. Staying with them whilst I was doing my university studies might have also played a role. I had the privilege to read the Financial Times. Back then, Business Day and Financial Mail were sister publications to the
Yes.
Financial Times. So I had the privilege to get the pink paper. Back in the day, I was reading the Business Day every day. It used to be dropped in the house at Orange Grove in the morning before I went to university. So there was always that culture of reading and interacting with people who were writers. So perhaps that got me to writing. But what got me to financial writing or business writing was my
Yes.
time at Thomson Reuters in Johannesburg and in London when I did the apprenticeship. And I must give credit to a gentleman called Guguluri. I had been interned, and the first thing that you sent to do as an intern is a political story.
Oh,
But
really?
Google,
My internship involved making coffee. So you joined the correct organization.
yeah, I don't know. I was never asked to make coffee. I think people,
You are
I
lucky.
don't want to say advanced, maybe too kind. Oh, they knew their division of labor very well, dogs are, that there's no time to make coffee. So, there's a gentleman called Guguluri. He writes on technology. He was at the time, I think, the only black guy that was writing about equities or what we call companies today. And Gugu said, "Hey, I need a hand, bruh. Come on, stop with your politics." And he mentioned it as a joke, but he really meant it. He said political journalism is oversubscribed. You've got to go into a sector where the skills are sort of underplayed or underrepresented. And Google really got me to switch from politics to business writing.
So when you say underrepresented, are you speaking specifically underrepresented by brown people, are underrepresented in terms of gender, or just underrepresented in what sense?
I think it's both, the disadvantaged in the form of black, African, Indian, colored people, and women in general. If you look at bylines in newspapers even today, that has not changed. Part of the problem is some of us left the newsroom and we we didn't assist in solving that problem.
Okay. So you are now writing financial. You now switch from political journalism to financial journalism. All of these things are nodes, right? And I love how you just said everything happens in a context. So Gugu then lights your fire. I'm assuming that you loved it a lot, because how then do you transition from reporting on financial stories to writing a book that at its core, I guess people might say it speaks to the early waves of Black economic transformation. But you, from our last conversation, were very clear that it actually speaks about the first family of Black industrialists. So maybe let's start there. Let's start with why the title for the book, why you wrote the book, and what you want people to understand from. Because I'm still remembering the story of the hotelier, and I'm still thinking, oh my lord, this was before
Sure.
even Mandela was born or even arrested, but we already had black folks who were owning property. So please walk us through the journey from the newsroom to, I suspect you were sitting alone typing away, and you had this manuscript.
Sure. You know, at business day, whilst I was writing about businesses, I also had a bias or a conscience to write about black business people. No, I hated the fact that people had to wait for scandal before they wrote about black business people. So I would go and find what I would call talent, people who were in business. either as CEOs, as entrepreneurs. Then a gentleman called Patrick Bulger, who was page one editor at the time at Business Day, came to me and said, Buti, why don't you write a book? I can link you to publishers. And Balja had real concerns. His main concern was that there weren't enough books in the bookstores about black business people. And the thinking back then, Zah, was that we would do a book on black economic empowerment. So we got around, it was a joint project then. So we got around talking to key people who were involved with BE in the first wave, second wave. And as we sat with those people, the light bulb just went on that you can't write about BE or Black Economic Empowerment without understanding where Black business comes from. Just make an attempt, try and scratch beyond the surface before critiquing Black people based on Black economic empowerment. And digging deep then got one into business people in the 1800s.
But no, I'm nodding because I'm going yes, and because yes, you ended up digging through archives, and I'm certain that there were places you went where the dust had settled just before the turn of the century. But so walk us through that journey. Walk us through the. Okay,
So,
so now this starts off as a joint project. You're now evolving. You're seeing.
sure,
Let's tell the story from the beginning. My mother always says
sure,
when I say, sometimes I never know where to start in telling a story. She goes, the beginning is always a
sure.
good place, baby. So help take us to the beginning.
So I had been privileged enough to interview a number of very smart people who gave me their time. People like Brian Mulife, people like President Thabo Mbeki, people like Penuel Maduna, Mzi, Kumalo, Bulelani Ncuka, many of them, Saki Maxozoma, you can mention them, Sandile Zungu. And all of them had a theme that, the problem that we had, that we still have with BE, is that there are very bad assumptions that black people didn't know about business up until BE arrived from Canaan, for a lack of a better word. And all of them had emphasized that. And at that time, a friend of mine who's a lawyer and a historian was busy with his book, The Land is Ours. And he said to me, you've got to befriend the archive if you want to do real work. Just switch off the internet. Please respect the reader. Don't write a book that's based on www.certainwebsite.com. Just try again and scratch the surface. And he wasn't demeaning to people that use those avenues to research, because certain books can be done using a certain news publication, accessing it via the website. It all depends on the timing. This project that I was working on was certainly not going to work on a URL research type of thing. So Tembega then said, go to VETS. You must know about the VETS archives at the Cullinan Library. Go to Pretoria on Hamilton Street. That's where the National Archives of the country are. Go to the Western Cape Archives on Rowland Street. And sometimes he would fly from Johannesburg to Cape Town doing his own research. And we would meet at the archives. We would go to it's now a bent building, the Yaga Library at the University of Cape Town. which is where I did the bulk of the research actually at the Yaga Library at UCT, on Rowland Street at the Western Cape Archives, and to a certain degree, the archives at Hamilton Street in Pretoria and Wits University. So you then rock up at the archive. You don't know how this thing works, Doc. You
Yes.
say, I am researching black business people who did business in the 1800s.
Yes.
Then the archivist asks you, who are you looking for?
Whoa.
And you just throw names. And then you are introduced to this thing called a microfilm. Now, a microfilm is a film full of newspapers of the 1800s and 1900s. And they
Yes.
try and guide you. So if you go through the microfilm, you might be lucky and get hold of certain names. The systematic way that I used was to go through classifieds, because back then, even in the late 1800s, businesses were advertised.
Mm.
So you go through classifieds and you get hold of certain names. Then you start digging on those names. Start digging. And how do you dig? You go through estate files. So you then go and ask for an estate file of
Yes.
someone, and they hand it over to you in a box. You open up the box, it's dusty, it's creepy, because these are papers that were held by people in the 1800s. And certainly the subjects that you are now researching now, they are in cursive writing. You are sitting in buildings that are like a fortress. It is quiet, and it's just spooky. The papers are written in cursive writing in ink, and some of it is fading. So they're not typed. And
Yes.
you've got to try and decipher this cursive writing. Now that process, left very big lessons in me. It got me worried about how some schools are abandoning cursive writing and just doing print and block letter writing to make it easy for children. That got me worried, because if children are being taught in that manner, then they can't use the archives. Or maybe someone who's much more advanced than me will say, no, there'll be an app for that to decipher cursive cursive writing. So that was the process. You dig, and when you find the info, Zah,
Yeah.
I promise you, there is nothing as liberating as finding that information, whether someone was going through a divorce and they had to explain the assets and liabilities that they had, whether someone was applying for a passport to America. And you remember back then in the day, if you needed a business, if you wanted to start a business, you had to apply to the city council, or whichever department. So you'd have to go through those files, and the feeling when you open up that box, and sometimes you spend 5 hours in the archives and you get nothing, and you go back home feeling down, but you try again, yeah.
So who's the first black business person story you came across? And how did you and did that story make it into the book?
Sure. So, for me, and when I was writing the book, because I come from the Eastern Cape, I made sure that I wasn't going to do a regional Cosa Nostra book. I had to make sure that it was representative of all the colonies of that time. So Natal, Cape, the Transvaals, and the Orange Free State, as it was called. So I bumped into a number of business people, at the archives, but I had to split them so that the book, Native Merchants, was broader than the Cape. It's going to sound biased, but he was prolific. So Paul Kliniwe, a hotelier,
Yes.
was a teacher. Before he was a teacher, he was a postal serviceman. He went to school at an old age, and enrolled at one of the missionary schools, ended up becoming a teacher, but he was influenced by a newspaperman
Yes.
who had started his own newspaper, by the way. John Tengo Jabavu had raised a bond of about £500 before 1880 with John Knox Bokwe,
Yes.
to start a newspaper. So Paul Kliniwe had been influenced by John Tengo Jabavu. So Paul moved from teaching
Yes.
to starting a hotel, but he built that hotel in steps. First, he had what you would call a bed and breakfast
Yes.
today, and then that bed and breakfast grew to many rooms, and at some point, it grew into a hotel. By 1892, he had raised £2,000 to build that hotel, which was called the Temperance, in King Williamstown in the Eastern Cape province. And newspapers of the day would write that the hotel was fit to be inhabited by both the Englishmen and I don't want to use that word that they use liberally, the Nguni language, or the native man, the native man.
Yes, the native man. But I'm sitting here and I'm going, you're speaking about 1892, right? And here we are in 2023. And because what you're trying to do is make us aware that this idea of Black people in business, it didn't start with the introduction of transforming, or at least laws that were attempting to transform the economic landscape. So that's the one piece that you're landing. The second piece that you're landing is that even those ancestors, because that is the line from which we flow, they were building businesses that were more than just a shack. So this idea of starting small with a B&B to then finally have a property that was world class, because I'm deducing that when somebody says a property that is worthy of the patronage of the English people, it means in their eyes that that property was world class. So
Sure.
why are
It was
we
double story, Doc. It was a double
there?
story way back.
Double story. But here we are, Phakamisa. It's 2023. What are we not paying attention to as Black people in business? What are we not paying attention to as teachers of Black and white children? What are we not paying attention to as a majority Black led government? Why are these lessons not transforming into an inheritance that we can use to build a future to bequeath to the next generation?
It's got to do with education, Doc. It really has to do with education. And I say education because through education, you acquire knowledge and you shed a lot of your ignorance
Ignorance.
in the process of acquiring knowledge. I think education, investment in education is a key issue in my knowledge. If I was taught in primary school that in the 1860s, black and white people on the Kimberley diamond fields were mining together, side by side, and exporting diamonds side by side until a vigilante group of racist people said they can't compete demographically, and therefore black people must be excluded. You know, I think we wouldn't be having these silly perceptions in 2022. Now, here's a theory that I'm trying to
Yes.
advance to on this platform, and I advance it in another project that I've been working on. Is that for someone to be an entrepreneur,
Mm,
you've got to be influenced by other people who are entrepreneurs. You've got to have been linked to entrepreneurship either physically or through knowledge. It
yes.
is through knowledge or knowing an entrepreneur physically that you get motivated to say you're going to start and do something. So education, in my opinion, is the main problem that we're still having. You know, the questions that you're asking in 2023. The other challenge is we're not writing. It can never be a white man's problem that there aren't enough business biographies on black people. It's everybody's duty to try and tell the story, and we divide the labor. You've got a way of telling the story. You are a teacher. You run interviews on such subjects so that people can know more. Other people must do the research. Other people must write. Other people must preserve the documents as archivists. You know, other people must be librarians and market the information. So it also doesn't sit with the Department of Basic Education and Higher Education. It also sits with ordinary citizens, both black and white.
So the idea then is that education is not schooling, because oftentimes when we speak of education, people think of school, but education is as you correctly say that anything that helps you dislodge an element of ignorance is by definition education.
Okay, Doc, I
So
lost you there.
so
I'm so
and
sorry I
again,
lost you, Doc. I can hear you. You were talking about people conflating classroom education with learning.
yes, yes, and that we as a nation we need to be aware of that distinction, because sending young people
Oh
into
my
the
God,
world
I'm
with a
losing.
33% pass rate isn't necessarily setting them up for success.
It's dropping off.
Is it dropping off?
It is indeed.
Um,
All right.
Doc, I lost you when you were saying as a nation.
Hang on 1 second. Josh is doing some magical things at the back. Have you entered load shedding, Phakamisa?
Not yet. Not yet.
Okay.
I'll
Okay.
check. Let me check my phone. I'm using
Oh,
my.
he says we are back, so we can proceed.
Okay,
Fantastic. So
sure.
the point I was making is that we have to get to a place where the deliberate pursuit of knowledge becomes the thing that we celebrate as opposed to a 33% pass rate. I don't see
Correct.
Phakamisa. Oh, he's here. He's here. He's here. So, but also, the other piece that I really like from the book is the story of Amawash. Of course, if you're listening, I do want you to go and get yourselves a copy of Native Merchants. And I am going to ask Paramisa one more time to tell us why that topic. Actually, please do that before I dive into the story of Amawash, because it remains such an uplifting piece of just our history as a nation. But please tell us why native merchants and why the choice of the term native, because for some people it may feel very pointed.
Um, these things happen in a when you're writing or researching or doing anything, there comes a time when your creative juices are just flowing. And there are a number of ways of getting your creative juices to flow. You either go to gym, you could be taking a walk, you could be listening to a Mozart or a Michael Muerane, you know, there are a number of ways. So the name native was quite fascinating because in English, native means a person who comes from a certain geographical location.
Yes,
So today, if you say someone is a native of South Africa, you're not just referring to black African people, you're including white people, right? But
yes,
back in the day, the word native meant someone who was black African and not European or Asian.
yes.
So I thought, okay, how cheeky. Um, and I played with a number of words. I think first it was native business, then businessman was too long for
Okay.
a cover.
Yeah.
Um, I think I think I'm not sure if it was the Merchants of Venice from Shakespeare, but I just put together native merchants. I kept on trying it as a joke. I'd tell my wife about it, Machema, what do you think about this name? She said, no, it's cool. I'd tell friends, and it hooked me. And then I said, okay, now we're writing native merchants. And yeah, yeah.
It's such a powerful displacement. I guess what you're doing is almost reframing a phrase so you can redefine it in a way that brings out its true richness and its true intention. And I guess in a parallel universe, you'd have rap artists also claim that they're doing that with the N word. And I know what lengthy conversations have happened in that realm. But what you're doing here, which is incredibly persuasive for me, is this idea that says we can finally get to call ourselves natives, understanding that native suggests that we come from this place, that we were not imported here, that we didn't drop off from some magical manna from heaven, but that we are of this earth and therefore of this fiber. So that's quite fascinating. Then to combine it with the idea of merchant by definition says I'm a trader. There's something I make, I exchange it because it has value. So it's not just I'm a beggar, because these are all the things that are just so problematic in the zeitgeist now is young black folk and maybe some young folk who are not necessarily black don't have enough examples of success that comes from a place before BE. Because you come across a 7-year-old now and you ask them what they want to be when they grow up, and they'll tell you they want to be a BE person, as though that's a pursuit or a role or a position you can occupy in society. So thank you for explaining that. Now, please tell us the story of Amawasha again.
I lost you, Doc, when you were talking
Maybe.
about a young child.
Okay, so I was saying it is good that we have young people who will have the benefit of the output of your work because it will help them understand the rich history from which they come, but also the responsibility they have to use their own unique skills and talents to move the human family forward. So I'm celebrating that. I'm also celebrating the permission you're giving us to use the term native in an affirmative and additive way, as opposed to its old, politicized, and divisive manner. So did
Sure,
you get that?
sure, sure,
Yeah, yeah.
sure,
Then I was
sure. No,
asking,
spot
tell
on.
me, Ramawasha.
Yes. Before I get to Amawash, one of the lessons that come up, I mentioned Paul Kliniwe. I mentioned
Yes,
John Tengo Chabavu. Now, if you are a capitalist or a
yes,
budding business person, even though capital had been racialized in South Africa, unfortunately, money cannot see color.
mm,
And you can never be a proper businessman if you are just going to be race based. Um, Race basis is not a product.
yes,
It's not enough to say you are a black business person. You've got to step beyond the name black business and sell something. And you've got to understand that capital is so fluid
mm,
that you will have to partner with people that are not necessarily black but are white or pink or green, whatever, to raise money. And the old businessmen of old raised money in a non racial manner. They raised money from their communities. They also raised money from established white business people. So, those are lessons even in 2023, Zah, that you are getting yourself into a hole if you think you are going to start a business purely on a racialized basis. It's not going to work. You are limiting your markets, from a capital raising perspective, even from a selling perspective. So you've got to be you've got to be careful. How do we get to Amawasha? The Amawasha people that I write about in the book, I first came across the term Amawasha from Charles van Onselen, a historian who wrote a number of books, including The New Nineveh, The New Babylon, a history of the Witwatersrand. And he writes about
yes,
gold mining. And I bumped into Amawasha. Amawasha were a group of Zulu men, you know, called the Washermen's Guild. Now, the term Amawasha is a bastardized version of washerman.
yes,
Us as black people, we've got a very creative way of Zulufying or Xhosifying or Tswanifying English names.
English, yes,
Yes. So that's the etymology of the name Amawasha. They were the Mhlongos, the Mutelezis. They had come from what was then colonial Natal, looking for jobs in the booming, or looking for opportunities, let me not say jobs, looking for opportunities in the booming Witwatersrand, which was then, known for gold
yes,
in the late 1800s, 1887, thereof. And Amawasha saw that the Witwatersrand was a very patriarchal society. People were covered in soot. And by soot, I don't mean the one from a retail store. Um, People were covered by the dust.
yes,
Yeah, that type of suit.
yes,
They were suited in suit, and you couldn't even identify if they were black or white, in terms of pigmentation, because it was just dusty, and
yes,
men were just carrying shovel. And Amawasha pick up. that, okay, there are no women here who wash clothes. These guys wake up every day and they go to the mines, and there's a laundry problem. So they then offer a service, a laundry service that's entrepreneurial, looking at a problem, identifying a problem, and finding a solution to it. So in Braamfontein, on the banks of, I think it's called the Braamspruit now, the Amawasha would take advantage of the stream there and wash clothes of these mining men. They were paying thousands of pounds because they had to rent space,
Yes.
to rent the clothing, store it, and so on. They were paying thousands of pounds annually in rent to landlords. Now you can imagine how much their revenue is. And the trick of Amawasha is that when they made money, they did not want to go back to Johannesburg. They went back to Natal and they bought back farms,
Yes.
in order to be commercial farmers. But, racism again, when people do not want to compete.
Mm.
The Amawasha were accused of being unhygienic.
Yes.
Can you imagine the Witwatersrand back then was unhygienic? People were not washing their clothes, and the people who wash the clothes are being accused of unhygienic. To an
Yes.
extent that rules are set up that say Amawasha must wash their clothes about a train's ride away from the central Witwatersrand, which on its own destroyed their access to markets. And in addition to that, increased their cost of doing business.
Yes.
Because you now have costs of either taking an ox wagon or whatever means of transport, to get into the central business district. And when you get into the central business district, you now have to try and connect with your market because you are no longer closer to your market, and that's how detrimental that was. And when they were discriminated against, new people came into the industry. They happened to be of European descent, but they had the advantage of knowing international equipment. So they started mechanizing the laundry service. Not that Amawasha wouldn't have done that. I mean, your Cliniwares, in addition to their hotels, they were retailers and they would import music from America. They would import cricket gear from England. So I'm confident had Amawasha been given the opportunity to do business, they would have raised enough money to import the machinery required to mechanize their laundry service.
This is such an uplifting book, and to the people who are listening today, I'm going to encourage you to get yourself a copy of Native Merchants, even if it becomes a conversation around a fire after tears, at a gathering at dinner time, because the story here, which we can never do justice to in an hour, believe it or not, Phakamisa, is that here is an opportunity for us as a people, to go back to examples that are truly, truly, like examples you cannot refute, whose origin speaks to how, if you're disciplined, how you're focused, if you have ambition, and you have the determination to make anything work, that you can make anything work. I mean, we are now almost 2 centuries later. We've got technology. There's a lot more ease in getting things started and getting things done, that we truly wouldn't have an excuse of not succeeding if our forefathers and foremothers were able to succeed with half or even a third of the opportunity that we currently have. So this is a wonderful wake up call and a reminder. If you don't have to be a teacher to pick up the book, you just have to be an invested South African who wants to understand the true and global picture of just capitalism and the black business person's role in contributing substantially to the economy of this country we now call South Africa. So this has been an important conversation for me because until I came across the book, some names I had never known. So if we are happy to rattle off a Shakespeare or a James Baldwin or a Martin Luther King or a Nelson Mandela or a Walter Sisulu or a Steve Biko, if you're in business, you've got to go back and understand the forefathers of capitalism so that we know that we come from a good place and we're made of good stuff. And if we focus our minds and we channel our intentions, then only good things can come from it. So I'm deeply, deeply grateful that you found the time, Phakamisa, to come and share with us a little bit, enough to get people off their chairs into exclusive books or wherever good books are sold, so they can get themselves a copy of the native versions. But before I let you go, Phakamisa, I wanted to ask you, so what does the future of business in South Africa look like? If you use your lens, now that you've got the benefit of having used the rearview mirror to take a look at where we come from, now I'm inviting you to look through the windshield and tell us
Sure,
in your own words how you think the future should shape out.
sure. I think South Africa first, we've got the demographics, right? We have
Yeah.
close to 60 million people in the country.
Hmm.
The unfortunate thing is that we are not taking advantage of the youth dominant demographics. So our young people are very much unemployed. Now, we are not going to fix unemployment by expecting jobs from government or from the private sector for that matter. What it requires
Did we
people.
just lose him?
Yeah, I think he dropped off. I think the load shedding must have hit.
Boy, and we've got 2 more minutes.
Let's see if he joins again.
Or I can ask him to leave me a voice note with his response. What are we going to do? Wait a minute.
I think let's wait 2 minutes. Let's
Okay.
see if he comes back.
Okay.
And then if not, then we can always ask for a voice note.
Okay. Let's see. He's such a rich storyteller. Are you guys learning stuff?
Yeah.
Or you're updating your Tinder status? Between Tinder and Bumble.
Here he is. He's back.
Hey, Phakamisa.
I'm sorry. I lost connection there, but I'm back.
And I'm so glad you're back.
Sure. So I was talking about, unemployment is a problem in South Africa,
Yes.
and it's not going to be fixed by us waiting for jobs to be created.
Yes.
It requires an effort for every young person. I I absolutely do not think that you've got to be a genius to be an entrepreneur. So the challenges that South Africa faces land, you
Helplessness.
know, exactly, but that on its own creates opportunities for entrepreneurship. And someone said to me, the most important thing is to start.
Yes.
Even if you start with a spaza shop,
Yes.
please start. But first, identify problems in your community and ask yourself what product will lend a solution to your community. Is it a situation where people do not have vegetables? Food has gotten expensive.
Yes.
If you have a patch of garden space in your village home, start, plant something and go and sell in the markets or give it to someone who's going to sell. So if we don't encourage people to go into business, Doc, the country's future is going to be bleak. And I absolutely do not think that you need to be an entrepreneur or you have to come from entrepreneurship. Yes, coming from entrepreneurship has an influence. But I do not think you have to be someone who hails from an entrepreneurial family to be an entrepreneur. I think you've got to associate, though, with entrepreneurs. Um, we really have to get people to be entrepreneurs. And those that are fortunate enough to be employed like me, we've got to use our private time very carefully. Rather than spending time on strong drink, um, gossiping, smoking, we've got to think carefully about how we use time to increase the revenues that we generate beyond the workplace. Of course, managing conflicts, right? And operating in an ethical manner with integrity.
That is
We've got to
fantastic.
understand that a salary is not enough, you know, and it's through doing extended work with your free time that you then use those resources to reinvest and build something new. I think the future is bright in this country. We have an independent media that has demonstrated, that it cannot be bought by politicians or wealthy business people at a time when it is required to act. We saw the media, how it operated in the past years in helping this country, to get out of the gutter. We've got a strong civil society. We've got a strong judiciary. We've got the most powerful stock exchange on the continent. So, regardless of the problems, we still have institutions in this country that create the necessary enabling environment for a bright future for our children and.
And for those of us who are child free, we'll just contribute for the generations to come.
Sure, and when we say children, any person who's an adult has a right to use the child, right? You do not have to be a biological parent
Yes,
to say yeah.
you want to contribute. But wow, Phakamisa, I am just so delighted. Thank you so much for your time. And I know when we speak again, I suspect actually that you'll be telling me you're working on another book or another project. But until we get to connect again, may, as they say, may harm avoid the streets you are on. And thank you once more. So, to the future readiness community, that's it. That's our conversation with Phakamisa. If anything, I'm moving away from this conversation just fueled by the understanding of where we come from, the importance of understanding your history, the importance of starting. And it's remember here that direction is a lot more important than speed. So if you're moving in the correct direction, it takes as long as it takes, but get started. I've also heard him encourage us to for those who are salaried, to think carefully about how they use time outside of that contractual corporate arrangement, because all of us have an opportunity to contribute. And if we think carefully, we can create the means to make certain that this nation truly lives up to its promise. So thank you, Phakamisa, and to the rest of the community. Until we speak again, namaste. This is Zah.